It's very fair for Ukrainians to say, hey, if the U.S. has this capability, both to give the Israelis this capability, and a lot of that was done by the Israeli Air Force, which is a first-rate Air Force, why can't the U.S. supply the Ukrainians with that kind of capability? And to the extent the U.S. did it itself, why not do that here? And there are a lot of dead Ukrainians who would be alive today if they were Israeli.
Hello and welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm Tim Miller. It's Monday, April 15th. This is a huge, massive news day, so we're doing three segments. We'll get to the historic first trial of Donald Trump, which is underway as I speak, with Ben Wittes in segment 3, so stick around for that. But first, Bill Kristol, a lot happening. I think we should, of course, start with the Iran attack on Israel over the weekend. It was a successful defense of just an absolutely massive missile attack. There were some out there that were saying that it was, kind of they were trying to fail, but it's crazy. That's a crazy statement given the degree of and the intensity of the amount of weapons that were shot at Israel from Iran. U.S. was of course played a key role in helping with that defense and Iron Dome, et cetera. So talk about the policy implications of that attack.
Yeah, Iran wanted to do damage to Israel. Their package of cruise missiles and drones that they launched actually is very much like what Russia has been launching against Ukraine. It has worked, unfortunately, against Ukraine because they don't have the air defense capabilities that Israel does and that we and other allies helped provide on Saturday night, which makes one wonder maybe we should do some of that for Ukraine as well. But they wanted to do damage. They failed to do damage. We did a good job of assembling the military assets to stop them from doing damage. Did a good job diplomatically, the Biden administration, I think, in getting other countries to help. But we stopped the damage, but we haven't made Iran pay a price yet.
Yeah, I mean, you got into that a little bit in the newsletter with Biden and Iran. I mean, I'm obviously sympathetic to the notion that escalation here going into a broader regional war is probably not advisable, but just recognizing the malign influence of Iran, this should be a wake-up call to some who've tried to minimize that.
Yeah, very much so. It's funny, there's a CENTCOM tweet or statement, actually, that they tweeted out last night that was much more aggressive than President Biden himself. Maybe that's appropriate, but really did refer to the sort of ongoing malign influence of Iran and made it seem as if that's something we still have to deal with and maybe have to set back, not just kind of parry each time they try to do something. And I think there's a broader point, which Elliot Cohen made in a fine article in The Atlantic, which I quote in the newsletter as well. Our friend Elliot Cohen, who's a co-host of the very important podcast, not quite as important as yours, Tim, but doesn't have quite as many viewers, but very high quality podcast.
Very high, much higher quality viewers. Shield of the Republic. Do check that out for all your foreign policy needs.
No, it's really great, he and Eric Edelman. And Elliot makes the point that we also need to think about the fact that there really is an alliance or coalition, maybe is a better word, of Iran, Russia, and China, North Korea too, Syria, and other actors. And they are helping each other, and they're all being more aggressive. Putin invaded Ukraine, to make the most obvious point. Hamas and now Iran attacking Israel. China really not getting nearly as much publicity, but really aggressive actions against Philippines as well as other things. And so they've all decided, apparently, that their aggression, it's checked, that they've paid a price for it. Certainly Putin has, but still they don't feel that they're not being deterred enough. And deterrence requires not just stopping people from doing things that making sure their aggression doesn't work, but also making them pay a price for their aggression.
Yeah, and the Cohen article, for folks who want to read it in The Atlantic, is called The Coalition of the Malevolent. And I pulled out one quote from that that struck me, which was, those four countries you mentioned are united by a growing belief that their moment is coming when a divided and indecisive West, richer but flabbier, will not fight. And then he goes on, American leaders will err if they attempt to compartmentalize each of these challenges today, Ukraine, Chinese aggression, Middle East conflict. It feels right. And there's a much stupider, much more brain dead version of this argument, which is being made by the Lindsey Grahams of the world on the right, that it's like Joe Biden's weakness is creating this, and that these actions are happening because they don't think that America will whatever, that they think they can push this old president around. Which I mean is obviously stupid, given the fact that there's a lot happening in the world that doesn't have to do with the American president. I think Nick Grossman, who writes for the Bulwark, sometimes wrote that the world stage is not a reality show where every action and reaction is a result of what the main character, the president of the United States, wants. But Biden has acted, I think, in each of these instances to want to help Ukraine to defend Israel successfully, to make sure we are defending Israel successfully over the weekend, et cetera. But maybe the criticism, the Cohen criticism, I think is more valid, that maybe there isn't a recognition of the seriousness of the moment and the broad nature of the threats.
Or if there's a recognition, not quite enough will and sort of a real thorough attempt to kind of reorganize the U.S. government and reorganize policies kind of across the board to deal with these threats. Where sort of he's dealing with it in a competent and responsible way. I mean, I'd say B plus, whatever, sober and serious way. Certainly, Lindsey Graham has a lot of nerve, right? I mean, his party is basically against dealing with these threats, at least in the case of Putin, and it stops really doing a huge amount of damage, aid now for 6 months, not just damage in Ukraine, but across the board in terms of our credibility. That damage so exceeds any evidence, any instance of Biden's weakness. You can't even, compare the two. But having said that, given the fact that there is this genuine coalition acting against us and against our friends, I think Biden needs to sort of step it up one more notch and not just parry the threats, but really have more of a Truman-like strategy to kind of deal with this situation we'll now face for quite a while.
Thinking about the options we have here in the split screen over the weekend, I was pretty struck that while Joe Biden was helping support Israel and with CENTCOM in Israel and pushing back against these attacks from Iran, we had his opponent, Donald Trump, was at a campaign rally. And, there are a lot of people out there. We keep hearing from these national security conservatives that feel disappointed that Joe Biden isn't going full-throated in support of Israel. And so they can't support him because of that. And so they're more interested in they're finding themselves, they just can't help it, Bill. They just can't help it that the libs are thrusting them into Donald Trump's arms by doing anti-Semitic chants on college campuses. So I was interested by what happened at the Donald Trump rally this weekend. Let's take a listen.
And Pennsylvania energy is a big problem.
Genocide Joe! Genocide Joe! Genocide Joe! Genocide Joe!
They're not wrong. I don't know if you heard that.
Genocide Joe! Genocide
So there you go. There's the campus left, river to the sea crowds, nickname for Joe Biden, appearing at a chant at the Donald Trump rally this weekend. Not exactly a McCain moment there from Donald Trump on stage, telling people that their chant isn't exactly correct.
Really extraordinary moment. Okay, so a bunch of idiots at the rally start to chant something that they understand to be anti-Biden. Maybe they don't even know what it refers to, or that it's a anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, I'm going to say.
I think a couple of them knew what it referred to. At least a couple of them did.
Yeah, they did. But anyway, the story is Trump. I mean, this has not gotten enough. Donald Trump himself, personally reacting to it, said they're not wrong. And he said it twice, right? 2 or 3 times. So, I mean, that is kind of amazing. It shows how utterly superficial any position he takes that happens to coincide with that of national security hawks or pro-Israel people or whatever, how utterly superficial that coincidence is, and how deep down there's nothing there. There's no ground for it. And if anything, I'd say the ground goes the other way with Trump, with America First. Eric Edelman, who I mentioned earlier, Elliot Cohen's co-host, has a longer article in a journal making the point that right-wing isolationism ultimately is not good for Israel. Never has been. Isn't going to be this time. America First is not pro-Israel, was not pro-Jewish in 1939, 1940. It's not going to ultimately be pro-Israel this time. And so this notion that, Trump would be doing better, I mean, maybe temporarily or accidentally, so to speak, but in terms of actually grounding serious support for Israel, as for other allies, there's just no comparison. Again, I come back to that Trump. Trump said it himself. This isn't just, someone else said something and Trump didn't denounce it, which is the more normal situation we're in all the time, right? Or you had dinner with someone who had said something 3 months before that's really horrible. That's not good. But here, Trump himself, they're not wrong.
They're not wrong. They're not wrong. He said over and over again, Genocide Joe. And again, the thing that frustrates me about all this, we talked about this with Jonathan Chait, but it's just worth continuing to drive home, is the political implications of this, where Biden finds himself stuck, where he's got this progressive left that's very unhappy with him. Sarah did a big focus group round on this on the focus group podcast over the weekend. It's worth listening to if you want to hear the progressive left's thoughts on this in their own words. But a lot of them that are unhappy with him because of his actions that have been largely in support of Israel, though at times he's spoken, tried to tamp Bibi's worst excesses down and nudge him in the right direction. But the left doesn't feel like that's been enough. And yet the pro-Israel side, has said that they're unhappy with Biden for not, giving a total blank check to Bibi. And so instead they're more leaning towards Trump, and their rationale for this that they've given time and again is, well, it's just the left is pushing Biden to, the Biden is trying to, appeal to Dearborn, Michigan or something. Like you hear these things on Fox and in the Wall Street Journal Ed Board, and Biden is softening. And it's like the people that are protesting Israel's actions, that are protesting the American administration, hate Joe Biden. They think he's committing a genocide. They hate him. And many of them are happy to help elect Donald Trump to punish Joe Biden. And here we have at the Donald Trump rally, people echoing their attacks on the president, echoing their attacks on the president for being too strong with Israel. It's a Donald Trump rally, and they are attacking Joe Biden for being too strong with Israel. You would think that would maybe sink in with some of the people in the Wall Street Journal crowd, but it doesn't really, the AEI crowd, but it doesn't really seem like it is. And you got Tucker Carlson, some of the most influential people out there, and Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens echoing this.
They're saying Israel is committing genocide and Joe Biden is Genocide Joe because he's defending Israel. And he's defending Israel, and Israel is not committing genocide. And Donald Trump endorsed the notion that Israel is committing genocide and Joe Biden is in supporting Israel is Genocide Joe. So, yes, maybe all of our pro-Israel friends could rethink their silly. I mean, I would be a tick different than Biden on Israel, but the idea that should drive them to Trump is really ridiculous.
All right, two more things rapid fire, then we'll get keep you around for Ben Wittes for segment 2. We've got New York Times Siena poll out over the weekend, 46-45, a tick up for Biden as he has basically coalesced a lot of the Democratic folks who were in these polls who were, I think saying that they were undecided because of unhappiness with Biden over maybe Gaza or maybe inflation or some other issue. So that is at least a marginal good sign that he's starting to coalesce his base here in the spring, which is something we expected. One sub point in that poll that jumped out to me, which you mentioned in your newsletter, I just do want to mention. Among young voters, 18 to 29, they were asked if Donald Trump has ever said anything offensive. They said 23% of them said yes recently. 52% said yes, but not recently. And then the remaining said never. I just another striking example of how Trump is kind of benefiting from the news environment right now, that people aren't. I mean, it was just last week you're on the podcast, we were talking about his racist immigration comments, and he does offensive things all the time.
Yeah, no, the poll's good news, and it's moving in the right direction. Biden's picked up, just in that poll, 4 points in about 6 weeks, which is very good. He's now 4 points behind where he was still in the 2020 vote, so that's not so good. And he needs to pick up more, and they need to really make the case, obviously, to emphasize what Trump has been saying. I do think the abortion rights issue, and what it signifies more broadly, we've talked about this and written about it too, I mean, a lot at the Bulwark, but the degree to which it seems extreme, it seems, just cruel and crazy. And that's what you get when you get Republican governance, Arizona being the latest example, but not the only example. I think the degree the Democrats can make that not just about one state and not even just about one issue, but about a whole mode of governance that you're going to get. If you get Trump and a Republican Congress, you're going to get Arizona, and you're going to get Texas, and you're going to get every state that has the most irrational and draconian curtailment of freedom in this area and in other areas areas.
All right. I would be remiss if we made it through segment 1 without listening to friend of the podcast, Sununu.
So just to sum up, you would support him for president even if he's convicted in classified documents. You support him for president even though you believe he contributed to an insurrection. You support him for president even though you believe he's lying about the last election. You'd support him for president even if he's convicted in the Manhattan case. I just want to say the answer to that is yes, correct?
Yeah, me and 51% of America.
Governor, thanks for your time this morning.
No, not right, actually. Not 51. This is the key point. Not 51% of America. Well, Trump's at 46%, but most of the Trump voters don't believe that. And so this is not to, defend the people in the MAGA cult who think that the deep state is out to get Donald Trump and he didn't do anything wrong. But it's not 46% of America. It's a very small percentage of people who are college educated, who live on the coasts, who are political animals, who recognize that Donald Trump tried to overthrow the government, said as much, and yet still support him anyway because of their irrational hatred of the left, or because they still want to be relevant, or because they want to be invited to the White House, or they want to be Commerce Secretary or whatever. It's a very small number of people who are that fucking craven, and Sununu is at the top of that list. So I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts about Sununu?
Maybe for governor, you should also rise above, voters who don't pay attention to politics quite as much. And he's a fancy kind of conservative governor of a well-educated state. He's probably read Edmund Burke on how leaders, representatives should not just pander to their constituents. He probably could quote that even maybe. And so it's pathetic, that answer. Really, it's just pathetic. Yeah, as you say, he overstates the situation in terms of the public, but it's like, well, the public maybe is wrong. So I'm entitled to be not just wrong, but utterly irresponsible.
Yeah, but wrong and smug. I'm entitled to be wrong and smug about it. Okay, we'll be back on the other side. Bill, stick around, and we'll bring in our friend Ben Wittes. Hey, JVL, it's been months since I've seen you without a screen intermediary. I'm just dying to lick your face and put my hands on you. And so are you going to come do some public events with us and be among the people?
Human contact? Yes. Yes, I'm going to do it. I'm coming out of the house. I'm leaving the basement for 2 days. May 1st in Philadelphia and May 15th in Washington, D.C.
This will be the first Bulwark event where we encourage jeering because it's Philly, people, so jeer us.
Yes.
May 1st.
If we have a bad show, I expect the Philly crowd to boo us.
Please. Or anyway, even if it's a good show, boo us anyway. We deserve it. May 1st in Philly, May 15th, 6 and I Synagogue in Washington, D.C. Come hang out. Go to thebulwark.com/events to get your tickets. Thebulwark.com/events. And JVL, I just can't wait to get all up on you. All right, we are back. Segment 2. Bill Kristol and Ben Wittes, editor-in-chief of Lawfare, senior fellow at Brookings. Hey, Ben.
Hey, how are you?
You're in a hammock. Are you saying anything offensive in the hammock?
I haven't said anything offensive recently, but, if you go back a ways, there are a few offensive things.
All right, let's see if we can change that here today. Me and Ben are going to get down with Stormy. That came out wrong, but you know what I meant. We're going to get down on the Stormy trial here in a minute. But first, I wanted to have both of you guys because I do think that the Iran attack on Israel put the situation in Ukraine in a little bit of a different perspective. There was one tweet from Jay in Kyiv that I wanted to just share and get both of your reaction to. After seeing U.S. and British jets shoot down hundreds of Iranian missiles and drones last night, saving thousands of Israeli lives, everyone in Ukraine is saying the same thing. The Russian military is weaker than Iran's. But not only will allies not shoot down Russian missiles, they won't even give us the jets to do it ourselves. We even know where all Russia's bomber aircraft sit, but allies refuse to give us the tools to destroy them. Russia is completely destroying Ukraine. It's only getting worse. Whose side is the U.S. on? Ugh. Pretty compelling from Jay in Ukraine. Ben?
Yeah, so there's a lot. First of all, that I spent a lot of the weekend with Ukrainians, and that is a quite widespread sentiment. Not the whose side is the U.S. on, but why not us? It's a little bit more plaintive and less aggressive than that in my experience. But there's this sense, look, Israel is not a NATO ally. It's actually very similarly situated to Ukraine in the U.S. security constellation. That is a extremely close non-ally partner, right? We don't have a treaty relationship with Israel. We have a highly developed military aid relationship and diplomatic relationship. And it's very fair for Ukrainians to say, hey, if the U.S. has this capability, both to give the Israelis this capability, and a lot of that was done by the Israeli Air Force, which is a first-rate Air Force, why can't the U.S. supply the Ukrainians with that kind of capability? And to the extent the U.S. did it itself, and the U.S. did a lot of it itself, why not do that here? And there are a lot of dead Ukrainians who would be alive today if they were Israeli.
Bill?
Oh, that's well said. I mean, just three quick points, mostly echoing Ben, but I mean, one, it's so beyond disgraceful that Congress has sat on this aid package for 6 months. There's so much blood on their hands. It's not on Congress's hands. It's on the Republicans in the House, on their hands. Maybe that'll change this week, but it's the damage that is done on the ground as well as more broadly in terms of U.S. foreign policy is really, I think, the greatest damage I know of any Congress doing in my memory over these 6 months. Secondly, the Biden administration could have and should have done more in terms of providing weapons at different stages. And I think they've done pretty well, but not enough. And it became more obvious that it wasn't enough, and they still didn't really ratchet it up. And third, I've always thought that it's artificial for us to not, I mean, there was talk very early on about a no-fly zone in Ukraine. It's really worth looking at. I mean, we do have NATO in the U.S. We did it in the Balkans. We didn't have a treaty relationship there against Milosevic. We've done it in effect with Israel. And I think that's a strong case for thinking about expanding the U.S. and NATO role in terms of stopping Russia from pummeling Ukraine from the air.
Yeah, it's pretty compelling on all sides for me. From put a finer point on it on the Republican side that I think it's worth just spending a little time stewing on. From writes, Ukrainians ask why won't the Americans help shoot down the missiles barraging us? The actual answer is that the Americans who are denying Ukraine aid is a faction in Congress that takes orders from an ex-president who wants Russia to win. Pretty blunt, but like, where's the point? Show me the lie, Ben Wittes.
No, there's no lie there. And Trump, when he's being candid, is actually pretty candid about it, right? His idea of a peace plan here is to let the Russians have a big chunk of Ukraine. And that's his, I'll fix this in 24 hours. I think the good news is that everybody knows who spends the time to understand the first thing about U.S. politics. Everybody knows where this is coming from. And, if you believe in whether you call it liberal internationalism or neoconservatism or, a muscular foreign policy or the post-war consensus, if you believe in any of that stuff, one party today represents it and the other party does not. And it's the flip side of what it used to be. On the other hand, the bad news is that there's no earthly reason for the average Ukrainian to spend the time to understand this distinction. And what they understand is that the United States is abandoning them. And in exactly, by the way, the same way that Slovakia just elected a pro-Putin president and Hungary has a pro-Putin president, they see one by one the countries turning against them and turning toward Russia, and we are among those. And the fact that the overwhelming majority of Americans don't feel that way, the administration remains committed with all of its flaws, is actually a nuance that is quite lost on a lot of people. And you can't blame them. They've got missiles coming at their house. Why should they distinguish between the MAGA wing of the Republican Party, the mainstream wing, and Democrats?
Yeah. Bill, we talked about this a little bit just with regards to the Genocide Joe, but to put a finer point on it, given the state of play out there, how are the Tom Cottons of the world, how are the Republican military hawks rationalizing continued support for Trump? Because I can understand criticizing Joe Biden from those groups, but then taking the next step to saying that Trump is going to be better when you're staring down somebody that is essentially Putin's best asset in the West in the war in Ukraine, He's going along with the Genocide Joe chants. He was happy to insult Bibi. He's told, who the hell knows what he would actually do in this situation. How are these guys rationalizing this, just given the gross irresponsibility of Trump across the board, and maybe the active support of Putin in one of the theaters here?
I mean, it occurs to me that the interview with your friend Sununu that you played the clip of and referred to happened after the Genocide Joe chants, which, if I'm not mistaken, was Saturday night, right? And Sununu's interview was Sunday morning. Seems not to have startled, moved him at all, and I bet it won't move anyone. So, how do they rationalize it? I don't know. They've got to keep those horrible campus liberals out of the White House, even though Trump is now the one who's supporting the chant to the campus left. Liberals is unfair. The campus far left, the Genocide Joe, against Biden, right? I mean,
but there's and the Ukraine thing with this is more clear, right? I mean, there doesn't seem to be any push, right? Like the Lindsey Grahams of the world and the Cottons. Like, where is what are they saying, that they're gonna deal with him privately, or they're hoping maybe that Trump actually won't care and he gets back in there and he makes Tom Cotton Secretary of Defense because he doesn't have any care about policy, and that's just the bet?
Well, look at how little they've done, to get to Ben's point about Ben distinguished correctly MAGA Republicans and mainstream Republicans. But the mainstream Republicans could overcome the MAGA Republicans here. They have agency, as we like to say these days, in the House. It would take X number of them to join a discharge petition. It would take X number of them to tell Speaker Johnson that they're going to vote to vacate the speakership if he doesn't bring it to the floor. And we'll see if it happens finally this week. They have, some of them have been doing their best, but doing their best in a very timid and tentative way, not in a way that is responsive to the urgency and importance of the moment.
Yeah. One more from just to point it out. The Democratic House has already approved 4 aid requests to Ukraine totaling $75 billion. And since then, it's a Republican House that's refused all aid. It's pretty cut and dry. Bill, Kristol, thank you so much. Ben, stick around. Let's talk some Trump trials.